In our lesson for December the 15th, we continue in our study of John, and we're looking this week at John chapter 14. And everything I said about John 13, I can really say about John 14. Is one of the richest chapters in all of the Bible. And it's a chapter that, unlike last week's lesson that dealt with different incidents and predictions, is full of Jesus' promises to us. The problem with a promise is that we don't always keep the promise. All of us have that in our experience. Nobody, I guess, makes more promises that they don't keep than politicians, and particularly presidents or presidential candidates. I think back to 1916 when Woodrow Wilson was elected for a second term as president based on the promise he kept us out of war. And within a year, he asked the Congress to make a declaration of war. It was a promise he couldn't keep. I remember more recently George H.W. Bush, in running for president, in one of his speeches says, "Read my lips, no new taxes." But before his first term was over, he brought down on us a new series of taxes. Promises are often not kept. But this is not true when we think about the promises of Jesus. Jesus promised to be raised from the grave after 3 days, and He was. Jesus promised that He would send them the Comforter, and He did. Jesus promises someday that He will come back and take us to be where He is, and He will. Jesus keeps His promises. And I think that's a comfort as we listen to the promises He makes in our text for today. And He begins in chapter 14, verses 1 through 4, by promising a place to those of us who believe in Him. Now, you need to remember the context in which He made this statement in the opening verses of chapter 14. It was a time of deep anxiety for the disciples. Remember last week's lesson. Judas was going to betray Him. Peter was going to deny Him. Death was coming. They didn't know what their future would hold. It was a time of unbelievable anxiety for the disciples. And to add to this, they worried about what they would do for their future. And so in the midst of all of this anxiety and uncertainty, Jesus gives them this assurance in John chapter 14, verse 1. He says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Now, Jesus is not saying to the disciples, put on a happy face, act like everything's okay. What He says is much deeper than that. What He says is that in the midst of the turmoil, you can trust God. And so you need to put your trust in Him. And as you trust God, you can also trust me. So it's not a put on the happy face, it's dig deep and realize that the anchor of your faith is something in which you can count. Now, along with the word of consolation, Jesus offers a promise. He promises to go ahead of us and provide a place for us, and to offer us this promise that when we go through the door that is called death, that we will have a place waiting for us that God has prepared. Notice that He calls it in our text a room. He prepares for us a room. Or if you have the King James Version, He says He will prepare for us a mansion. Now, both of those words conjure up the idea of home. And I think that's the image that Jesus is trying to portray here. Not that we have our own nice little home or even this great big mansion. He wants us to know that what He has prepared for us, what He is promising us, has the comfort of home. The thing about being gone from home for a long time, you finally get home, you get into your room, you get into your own bed. Think about how comfortable that is. Jesus says, the place I am preparing for you will be comfortable just like that. And then He hooks on to that promise two other ideas, one in verse 3 and one in verse 4. Verse 3, He says, "If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am." In other words, Jesus says, I've got a place prepared for you. Not to worry, I'm going to come back and show you the pathway that will lead you to that place. And then secondly, verse 4, He says, "You know the way to the place where I am going." Now, up to this point, I'm sure they were grabbing on to the consolation that he offered. He offered them trust. He offered them a foundation of hope. He offered them the promise of a place prepared for them no matter what might happen to them in the future. But then all of a sudden, he throws out this thing, you know the way. And that leads to Roman numeral 2, which is somewhat perplexity or confusion among the disciples. And you'll notice in verse 5, Thomas speaks up. Thomas says, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how do we know the way? So Jesus promises that they know the way, and Thomas is confused about that, and so he raises the question, how do we know the way? Jesus answers with one of the most important statements in the Gospel of John, another one of what scholars refer to as the I am sayings of Jesus. In other words, sayings in which Jesus takes the term I am and uses that in reference to himself. I am the door. I am the shepherd. I am the light of the world. And here in verse 6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And of course, the background here is that encounter of Moses with God when Moses wants to know what God's name is, who is sending him back to deliver the Hebrew people, and God says, I am is sending you. And so Jesus takes that term for God now and refers it to himself, and he says to Thomas, I am. And then he adds to it these 3 tags. I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Now, preachers have preached sermons, series of sermons about that, and scholars have written books about that. Exactly what does that statement mean? Well, let me just give you a thought or two. When he says, I am the way, he identifies himself as the one who will guide the disciples through the darkness and uncertainty of the days ahead. I am the way. When he says, I am the truth, he assures the disciples that he will put them in touch with what is real and permanent in the midst of the illusory uncertainty of their time. When he says, I am the life, he assures them that he will provide for them an enduring quality that even death will not be able to take from them. I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Now, I want you to notice something that we sometimes don't think about when we hear that statement. Jesus did not say, I will point you to the way, I will show you the light, or I will help you find that life. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I think what Jesus is saying here is that we experience those things not by following a certain recipe, but by coming into a relationship with Him. When Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus was saying, all of these things can be yours. All of these promises can be yours if you come into a relationship with me. So Jesus begins Roman numeral 1 with a promise of a place, and Roman numeral 2, he adds that there is a pathway. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, he explains this further. If you'll look at verse 7 through 11, he explains it further by saying, all of these things are true that I've just told you because of my unique relationship with God. Jesus reminds them that He is uniquely related to God, and that when they know Him, they know God. When they relate to Him, they relate to God. And because of that, Jesus can assure them that He is the way, He is the truth, and He is the life. Now, He identifies 2 factors that confirm His unique relationship with God. One of them is in verse 10, and one of them is in verse 11. Notice verse 10. He says, don't you believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? And then look at the next phrase. The words I say to you are not just my own. In other words, my word, the things that I have taught, the teaching that I have given you, These confirm the fact that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. Verse 11, he points to his works. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or at least believe on the evidence of the miracles themselves. So what is the evidence that he is one with the Father and the Father is one with him? He says, it's the words I speak. It's the works that I have done. Because of these things, you know that I and the Father are one. And because of that, you can claim this promise, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the light. Roman numeral number 3. This is maybe the most fantastic of the whole promise, all the promises in this 14th chapter, and this is the promise of power. He says in chapter 14, verse 11, believe me, he says, believe me when I say I'm in the Father and the Father's in me, or believe at least the miracles. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. Now that's an amazing statement. If you believe in me, then you're going to be able to do the things that I have been doing. You'll be able to speak the words of truth like I have been speaking them. You'll be able to do mighty miracles of God like I have been doing them. If you believe in me, you will do what I have done. But look at the next phrase. He says, he will do even greater things. Now, I don't know about you, but if you really understand the full impact of that, it almost takes your breath away. We will have the power to do the things beyond even the things that Jesus has done. How will we do those? He says in verse 13, we will do them in His name. So through the name and the power of Jesus, He promised us that we will be able to do even more than what He did during His time on the earth. And then Roman numeral 4, the promise of peace. It's a very well-known passage where He promises His peace. But what we need to remember is that it's a peace different from the peace that the world offers. It's not a peace in the absence of problems. It's an inner peace in the midst of these problems. And Jesus makes this promise to the disciples on that last night of His life. Now notice the application down at the bottom. These are all they all come out of the promises Jesus made. Direction in the present. He's going to be with us to show us the way. Comfort in the presence. He gives us a peace to sustain us. Hope in the presence. He has prepared a place for us. So we can take all of those promises and apply them to our life and remind us that as we live out our lives, we have direction, we have comfort, we have hope through Jesus Christ. Now make those applications as you teach the lesson this week.